Today we're going to talk about why Louis XVI needed to call the Estates General, who the Estates General was, and we're doing this because this is the immediate cause for the French Revolution. While revolutions always can have more than one potential starting place, historians pretty clearly agree that the French Revolution started with the calling of the Estates General and the Tennis Court Oath. So after this video, we're talking less about what led up to the French Revolution and more about what happened during the French Revolution, although there is still some back and forth. So the Estates General was comprised of the three different social groups in France at the time. The first estate was made up of the clergy, the second estate was made up of the aristocrats, and the third estate was made up of the commoners. Now, each of these could be subdivided even further. Like the first estate was made up of both clergy from the second estate and clergy from the third estate. Although usually the first estate would vote in line with the second estate when the Estates General was called. Same thing with the aristocrats. Had you had noble office or had you been part of the nobility for a very long time, were you descended from knights and their military endeavors, or had you bought your way into the nobility recently from the third estate? And then the third estate as well was broken down. You had the richer parts of the bourgeoisie, and you also had the poorer peasants who worked out in the farms and the fields. And all of that is just a very generalized overview. Don't take that as those are the be-all and end-all of the divisions. Just that there were groups within these first and second and third estates. When Louis XVI called the Estates General, which was the voting body for France, in June of 1789, his plan to try and get them to approve new taxes backfired spectacularly. Louis had kind of expected that the Estates General would just rubber stamp what he wanted them to do. However, the Third Estate in particular had many grievances, and Louis had tried to get them on side with some concessions. But seeing an opportunity to create some meaningful change, they instead demanded that a constitution outlining the equal rights of all men, because this was still a very patriarchal society, but equal rights for all men in France to be set out instead of just rubber stamping what Louis wanted them to rubber stamp. So what they did is they actually declared themselves to be the National Assembly. Louis tried to lock them out of the Assembly's chamber hall because he got so frustrated with them, and by that point deeply regretted calling the Estates General in the first place. However, they moved themselves over to a literal tennis court that was indoors and together voted to take the tennis court oath, saying that only they represented the nation. And this is important because this is nation in terms of a unified nation that we were talking about in chapter 1. This isn't just we represent the country, this is we represent the unified French people. So we can see the start of nationalism rising right from the get-go here. When they took this oath, the Third Estate was joined by sympathetic members of the First Estate, largely those clergy who had formerly been part of the Third Estate and saw the struggles that the common people were going through. So really, at the tennis court oath, when the French Revolution gets started, you have a divide between the Second Estate and the Third Estate, between the nobility and between everyone else, although that would soon change in dramatic and unexpected ways.